achieved early. Now, the other piece of information that the projection box gives you is a period of time in which that projection is expected. But it's purely an expected time, okay? You should understand that Hurst cyclic principles, peaks can occur very early, or they can occur very late. Peaks don't occur in the middle of the cycle. Most people imagine that a cycle goes up for about half the cycle, and then will come down for half the cycle. That is not the case when one's working with Hurst cyclic principles. In Hurst cyclic principles, you get many different shapes of cycles. And you can, in fact, get a peak happening right at the beginning of the cycle, and the rest of it is all downhill. Or you can get a peak happening right at the end of the cycle, and then a short downhill. Okay, so now these projection boxes that are being presented at the moment are, of course, saying that CentiTrader is expecting a late peak to the 40-day cycle. But now when I move my mouse over the second projection box, FLD2, the second pattern projection box, you will notice that what we call the trigger lines or the origin lines, and let's see if I can highlight them. These lines here, this ring, this circle with these blue dotted lines here, okay, those lines aren't extending from the middle of the projection box as they would normally. They have in fact moved over to a particular price bar. What does that mean? That means the CentiTrader believes that it's possible that this first projection has already been fulfilled. Okay? Of course, price, as we discovered a moment ago, has already reached the appropriate level. All right? It's gone right up into the middle of that projection box. The only thing that hasn't happened is time. Now, cycles are, of course, very cyclical. Time's a very important part of analyzing using cyclic principles. But when it comes to locating peaks in a market, you should know that time is very variable. Peaks often occur very early and sometimes occur very late. Okay? Troughs, one can pinpoint much more accurately, but not peaks. So therefore, it's very possible that, in fact, this peak has already occurred and the market is now moving down towards the second projection box. Okay? So, those are the FLD pattern projection boxes. Now, we had an email asking about, and I hope that I understood the question properly. We had an email asking about the other projections. The FLD pattern projections, if you like, are the simple condensation of a lot of information into two very simple boxes. Okay? We also call them market turning zones. They highlight for you very quickly, very easily, where the market is expected to turn. However, CentiTrader generates them by using several separate projections. Okay? What are those projections? Well, the one type of projection that CentiTrader uses is the projection of when price crosses an FLD. Okay? So I can tell you, because I wrote most of the code, so I can tell you exactly why that projection box is over there. CentiTrader is having a look at this FLD line coming over here, and it's saying, well, if price crosses that FLD line, okay, then we will have an FLD projection, which will be to over there. Okay? So the FLD projection is one of the things that CentiTrader takes into consideration when it's building its FLD pattern projection boxes. Now, there are 2 or 3 other things that CentiTrader takes into consideration. The other thing it takes into consideration is, of course, underlying trend. If the underlying trend, which is the pressure or the direction of the longer cycles, is pushing downwards, then it takes that into consideration when calculating the FLD pattern projection boxes. The other thing that CentiTrader takes into consideration is not only your trading cycle FLD, but in fact every single FLD that is present on your chart. So CentiTrader actually looks at all of those FLDs, something that's quite hard to do when you're trading or studying the chart for yourself. It takes a look at every single one of those FLDs, and it says, or it asks itself the question, what happens if price crosses this FLD? Well, then we've got a little projection to over here. then let me just quickly draw this as a quick demonstration. What happens if price crosses this 10-day FLD? Well, then we've got a projection to over here, which will take price over the 40-day FLD. What does that mean? That means we've got a projection to over here, and so on and so forth. It looks at every single FLD on your chart. Okay. Now, the other thing that Sentient Trader looks at are what are called refined FLD projections. Okay. And I'm going to show you how you can read lots of interesting information about this. If you go to View, Show the Analysis Summary panel, you can see a list of projections there. Okay? And you'll see mentioned there normal FLD projections. Normal FLD projections are projections that are caused by price crossing an FLD. It's very simple. Okay? You'll also see mentioned there refined FLD projections. What are refined FLD projections? Well, refined FLD projections are actually calculated by using the half span, third span, and two-third span moving averages, which are things that Hurst mentioned in his book, The Profit Magic of Stock Transaction Timing, but he never mentioned them in his cycles course. It was almost as if though he had rather lost interest in the half-span moving averages. The half-span moving averages are there in Sentient Trader. Thank you, Casey. I'm glad it was helpful, and hope to see you again in the next one. The half-span moving average is there in Sentient Trader for those of you who enjoyed reading about it in the Profit Magic of Stock Transaction Timing book. But there isn't only a half-span moving average. There's also a one-third span and a two-third span moving average. And when those moving averages cross, they generate projections. Those projections are called refined FLD projections in Sentient Trader. And you'll often read about those. The other type of projection that Sentient Trader refers to and considers when creating the FLD pattern projection boxes is what's called a mid-channel pause projection. Okay, and we're going to have a look at those projections in a moment because we need to consider the mid-channel pause when considering a trade. So I'm going to introduce you to those at the moment. We had a question emailed to us this week. Which projection should I consider? You have normal projections, refined projections, mid-channel pause projections, FLD pattern projections. Which ones should I consider? Well, the simple answer is that you should really just look at your FLD pattern projections. That's the simple answer. The more complex answer is that as you get to understand Hurst's trading, Hurst cyclic principles more and more thoroughly, you will know that normal FLD projections sometimes are very reliable, but at other times in different types of market conditions, they are not that reliable. So they are presented to you in Sentient Trader. You can look at them, you can study them, you can work with them. Whether or not you should take them too seriously is something that Sentient Trader has built into it in generating these FLD pattern projection boxes, which is why the simple answer is just look at the pattern projection boxes. But if you want to get more complicated about it, you can actually have a look at every single one of the projections that have been generated by Sentient Trader, and you can consider each one of those on its own merit, and you can decide whether you're interested in that particular projection, and whether you think the market is actually going to achieve that projection. Okay, I hope that answers the question about projections and projection boxes. Let's wrap up today's Trader Chat by considering taking a trade, which of course we did 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, a colleague of mine had enthusiastically entered a long trade on the basis of a 40-day cycle. I couldn't resist mentioning that again, but I pointed out in the Trader Chat at that point that a long trade was probably not a very good idea, and as it happens, as the market has played out, it indeed turns out not to have been a very good idea. Now, why has that? Let me just do a bit of drawing here, and let me turn off those pattern projection boxes. Why has this 40-day cycle? Here's the okay. Let's go back in time a little bit to early March. Here is a 40-day cycle, and that is the shape of it, roughly. Okay, I'm sort of echoing the price down there. Okay, that was that 40-day cycle. 2 weeks ago, in early April, the 40-day cycle formed another trough. Should you automatically buy when the 40-day cycle forms a trough? No, absolutely not. You need to consider your underlying trend. Okay, underlying trend is the pressure of the longer cycles. So, and in this particular case, you need to look at the underlying trend of this 40-day cycle, which started over here. And we spoke 2 weeks ago about the underlying trend. The underlying trend of this particular cycle, when you're considering trading, Hurst recommended you only look at the 2 cycles longer. The 2 cycles longer in this particular case are the 80-day cycle. Now, what's the 80-day cycle doing over this period in sort of late April? The 80-day cycle is, of course, heading downwards. And if you display your semicircles, let me do that. If you display your semicircles, you can see it. You can see that quite clearly. Here is the 80-day semicircle, which is of course heading down. What about the longer cycle? Next longer cycle up is the 20-week cycle. In which direction is the 20-week cycle going? Well, the 20-week cycle is heading upwards. Okay, the 20-week cycle formed a trough in early March, and I would need to zoom out a little bit so that we could see that a little more clearly. And let me do that, and let's have a look at our semicircles again. What's happening to the 20-week cycle? The 20-week cycle, as you can see from just looking at the semicircles, the 20-week cycle is heading up over there and is expected to top somewhere over there. But now, is the 20-week cycle really heading up? And I know we spoke about this 2 weeks ago, but I'm going to reiterate it because it's very, very important. Looking at the semicircles is the sort of basic first thumbsuck approach to performing trading. Is that 20-week cycle really still traveling upwards? We expect it to travel upwards because it looks like the semicircle is moving upwards. Okay, but I'm going to now show you some evidence that in fact the 20-week cycle has a 20-week cycle has already formed a peak, and here is that